sports has always, as I've said, been a platform for protests, political protests, particularly for the African American community. It actually goes all the way back to Jack Johnson, when he used to like to fight white opponents just to show them that he was a better man, believe it or not. And of course, it continued with a lot of athletes over the years. And 1968, there was something that stood out to me as a young kid. I was 8 years old, and I saw, and of course, very, very acutely aware of what was going on at the time growing up here in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I remember in April of that year, my mother sitting on the bed crying and said, "I can't believe that they killed that good man being Dr. Martin Luther King." And I remember crying that day. Later on that summer, that fall, the Olympics was going on, and I think many people had talked about boycotting the Olympics, African athletes at the time, and I didn't know what the word boycott meant at 8 years old. But in watching the Olympics and cheering for our athletes, the U.S. athletes, but mainly cheering for the black athletes, there were two young men that stood out. And in the 200 meters, it was Tommy Smith who won it, and it was John Carlos who came in third. And at the medal ceremony, both of those men stood up and gave a black power sign. And they used their platform to bring light to what was going on with the African American people in America. Right now, I want to welcome to the show the illustrious, the legendary Dr. John Carlos. Dr. Carlos, welcome to the Weekly Sports Magazine.
Well, I'm honored to be with you this morning.
Well, Dr. Carlos, it's really my honor, and I've got to be honest with you. I have chills right now talking to you because I understand more so than ever before what you did for our people, and I want to just personally thank you.
Oh, thank you again.
Let's talk a little. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, let me elaborate a little bit. You know, back in 47 years ago, you know, it was an Olympic project for human rights. Everyone keeps saying it was a Black Power movement, and I always say the only Black Power was our fannies running down that track. That was the Black Power.
Yeah.
But in actuality, it was a demonstration that was displayed relative to humankind, to humanities and so forth. That's what we were more concerned about. It wasn't just black people that was suffering and had to deal with various injustices throughout time. There's people of all color. Now, I could say I could probably focus in more on blacks because I'm a black man and I know what we had to endure. But it was a situation for humanity, and it was an Olympic project for humanity. It didn't say Olympic project for black rights or white rights. It just says Olympic project for human rights. So let's clear that up right away.
Well, thank you for that clarification. No doubt about that. Talk a little bit about what was the thought process of you and Tommy Smith at that time? Was this something that was planned? Was this something that you all just did, just automatic? How did that come about?
Well, we had a plan to bring some attention to the plight of people of color throughout the world by staging an Olympic boycott, a potential boycott. We tried and expressed as best we could to all the fellow athletes and make them have an understanding as to why it's necessary to even attempt to do a boycott. But yet and still through the years, you know, when you're a little kid, you have ideas of going to the Olympic Games and then hear someone come and want to rain on your parade and tell you that you should pull back after all the years of sacrifice, of training, and the commitment that you made to your community or your peers or your parents or your religion. Everybody wanted to, go and win that medal. So it was very difficult for a lot of them to understand and make that their primary when they had these desires for so many years. So, all we could do is, like I say, try and educate them, and then once we educate them, and then it was their decision. We said, decision you make today, you're going to have to live with for eternity. So just try and weigh it well in your minds. Most of them decided they wanted to go to the games. We had no right to tell them they didn't have a right to go to the games. That's what you want to do, then that's what we'll do. Relative to the demonstration itself, Dr. Smith and I, we decided roughly 30 minutes before we went out what we were going to do and how we were going to do it.
What was the reaction of your fellow teammates after the fact?
Well, it's pretty much like the country. It was split down the middle. Quite a few of them understood why, appreciated the gesture, and then other people was dismayed. You understand? Didn't understand and thought it was disrespectful.
Disrespectful because of what?
Well, I think it was disrespectful based on their teachings and their belief. They felt like we was being disrespectful to the flag, which I've made it clear to them that the flag is supposed to be encompassing everyone. I don't feel like I was encompassed by the flag at that particular time. So, I didn't know allegiance to something that didn't know allegiance to me. It took quite a while for a lot of people to realize what I was saying back at that time. I think a lot of people have understanding now from all different ethnic backgrounds.
Well, I'm curious even more so, what did some of obviously when there's a protest, everybody doesn't join in. What were some of the reactions of some of the black athletes at that time?
Well, like I say, most of them, they understood the necessity, but they just couldn't get around the fact that this is something that they wished for and desired all their lives. They made promises to their families, to their church, to their community, to themselves, that this is something that they want to do. And, it's like, man, I'm not going to let anything get in the way of what I want to do. I'm this close. So that's pretty much what it was.
And, of course, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Some guys were in the military. They got telegrams telling them they better not take part in no demonstrations or any unseen statements being made. So, people had their own particular reasons why they didn't. And, we could live with that. We understood that, and we appreciated and respected them just as much.
Dr. Carlos, I've read a lot about you since that time period. I remember in junior high and high school writing reports about the '68 Olympics. And one of the things that I found curious is the backlash that you and Dr. Smith got when coming back to the States. Talk a little bit about that, please.
It wasn't just Dr. Smith and I. It was Peter Norman as well. When we got back to our homelands, it wasn't the same as it was when we left. It's pretty much like the soldiers going to war. You see everybody at the train depot with the flags and the songs in their heart and going out. But when we came home, there wasn't any flags, wasn't any hoopla, wasn't no excitement, other than the fact that they felt that we had let the nation down, so to speak. And I'm just saying that's just the heart of the nation that felt that way, because most of them didn't have an understanding as to why we and what we did. Mm-hmm. And then when you sit back and think about how the right-wing media, how they portrayed it, they made it look like we were traitors to the nation. We denounced our American flag. We denounced our country. We didn't want to burn up the Statue of Liberty. That's the rhetoric that they were putting out there about us. We were all involved in education, trying to take people to a higher ground of understanding. That's been my plight all my life, to try and bring people to a better understanding with one another, so we can improve the things that we have to work on here in this society to make it better, not for ourselves, but for our kids after us.
And that's certainly, I think, what you all have done. You mentioned Peter Norman, and those of you who are not familiar with that name, Peter Norman is the white guy that was standing on the podium who got second place, who was from Australia. I found it pretty interesting as I got older and learned the history of Australia and how they treated the Aborigines. They ran parallel to South Africa. Yes, they did. But I found also that Peter Norman supported you guys. Talk a little bit about that relationship and what his thoughts were.
Well, you know, every time I think about Peter, the first thing I do is have a smile on my face, because Peter was a gifted athlete. He had a lot of personality about him. He was aware of the abilities that he had, and he wouldn't be intimidated by anyone. I remember one incident, I ran my heat, and he was in the heat, and I waved him down, and I looked out the corner of my eye, and he was waving me down, so he was boasting about his abilities as well. So I respected him as an athlete. But then down the line, it became something greater than him being an athlete. I realized that Peter Norman was a man. And a man comes in any color, you know, once they find themselves. And Peter Norman was a man. Even to the point when we were in the tunnel and we were making arrangements about how we were going to do the various demonstrations, I asked Peter Norman, did he believe in human rights? And he told me, of course, he believed in human rights. His mom and dad were Salvation Army workers all of his life. So I know there was a humanitarian cause. So I asked him, would he like to wear an Olympic Project for Human Rights button, which he did, and he wanted mine. I said, no, you can't get this one, but I'll get you one. And I had one of the rowers to throw down a button for me to put on him. And he went out there in support of us, 1,000%. And the whippings that we took here in the United States when we got home, you know, there was a downtime for Tommy Smith if they was beating on me. It was a downtime for me if they were beating on him. But Mr. Norman went back to Australia. There was no downtime for Mr. Norman. They beat on him 24/7, 365, just merely because he was a white man saying, I support the activities of a black man. And merely because he stood there with a button on to say, I believe in human rights, they desecrated him as much as they could before God called him.
Now, I know Tommy Smith is still around. Is Norman still around?
No, Mr. Norman died about 6-7 years ago.
I was well. Certainly, I am happy, and for the first time, you mentioned those buttons. I'm looking at that picture right now. I see those buttons. I never knew that those were particular buttons about what your cause was all about. So just learned something, and that's what I love about this show. Let's talk.
If you notice, I had that button on, and every picture you see of me, you'll see that button there. Whether I was running or walking or sitting or standing, it didn't matter. The main focus was to make people understand what this cause was, what was it about. And although, wearing the button and talking about it, it was still secondary because the press put their spin on it and led people down a different path.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to get you on, well, there are multiple reasons, but certainly I've wanted to talk to you for decades, and I'm proud to be able to do that today. But more importantly, no doubt you've heard about the situation that happened in Missouri, and you are hearing the backlash against the players as well. What are your thoughts on that, and what could you tell those Missouri football players and football and basketball and athletes around the country who are no doubt being exploited, being used and abused, and now that we know that racism does still exist and is on our college campuses, what would you tell those athletes and athletes who want to protest?
Well, first of all, I'd like to commend them. It takes a tremendous amount of courage, first of all, to realize that you're in a terrible situation, and the history of that situation has been long before your life, and to come to realization that someone has to take a stand, someone has to make a statement and say enough is enough. So I admire them for the statement that they made. My advice to them would be to let them know that this is not a moment, this is a movement. This is something where they threw their foot into the coals, and they're going to have to carry this on for the duration of their life. This is a movement to change people's attitudes. When you sit back and think about racism, no child is born a racist, man. Racism is taught to kids to have them to be against one another based on color, or texture of your hair, or your last name, or your environment. So, in terms of these kids here, they realized what they were in. They realized at the same time that it was about numbers. it was great that, God had 3 individuals 47 years ago in the victory stand, because had it been one individual in the victory stand, he'd have been rolled over so quick, so soon. But when you sit back and think about modern day numbers, it took a tremendous amount of individuals to come together to say, hey, man, we are one in this vein. If all 5 of them or 12 of them or what have you got up there, if one individual got up and said something or 2 individuals got up and said something, it wouldn't have been anything. But when they brought numbers to the table to say we will shut down the football team, that's one thing. If the individuals on the side of the president, where the president could have diffused a lot of things in the past, racial overtones that had been taking place, had he gotten up and did something, maybe that would have never come about. But he didn't get up. Now, those that was behind the president, they might say, man, we believe in your philosophy. That's why we're not urging you to push this issue. But yet and still, when these kids decided to step up, their numbers came on the other side and was economic numbers. So when the economic numbers come up, they look at the president and say, man, we might believe in your philosophy all day, but we got numbers we have to deal with as well. 1.5 million here, 1.5 million there, and another 1.5 million down the line. We cannot afford that. In essence, it's parallel to what happened in Los Angeles with the Clippers.
Yeah.
Same thing with that owner. He had racial overtones, his attitude towards the people that put the bread on his table. So when the athletes got together and said, no, he's got to go, and the other athletes, various athletes around the league said, no, he's got to go, then it's getting involved in economic numbers. So now they say, sir, we might agree with your politics, but we don't agree with the time of your politics, so you have to go. And until these young individuals mount and realize, yes, those individuals, they are the cow that gives the milk. We respect, we admire, and appreciate them. But it looks like we don't necessarily get the same admiration on our side. So in turn, what we're doing is letting the cow know, that with no grass, there's no cow. And the athletes are just that, the grass.
Well, Dr. Carlos, I want to thank you this morning for joining us this morning. Hey, look, I'm going to tell you, you are one of my heroes. I'm 55 years old, and you are my hero. I really appreciate your contribution to the movement as you continue to fight, continue to talk about the issues as it relates to race, justice, and equality around the world. And you taught me something this morning as well. I wish you love. I wish you peace. And, of course, we'll stay in touch, and anything that you need from me on this end, no doubt about it, I will be glad to help you. So I really appreciate you joining the Weekly Sports Magazine this morning.
I appreciate you, and let me give my sentiments to all those innocent people that lost their lives over there in Paris as well.
Yeah, no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
Right.
You have a great weekend, Dr. Carlos, and may the Creator show favor on you, my friend.